What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Raider World. So in today's video, I'll be installing the Rekluse cylinder for the Milwaukee 8 transmission. Founded in 2002, the Rekluse Motorsports Company completely changed the game in clutch performance technology. Made here in the USA, Rekluse started designing clutches mainly for off-road racing and eventually expanded their product line for adventure bikes and cruisers. Clutch packs like their Torque Drive Manual Clutch Kit for those looking for an assist in performance, or the Radius and Core Automatic Clutch Kits where you don't have to hold your clutch in at a red light or heavy traffic, giving you the ability to stop and go without having to use your clutch lever. This auto or reduced clutch effort technology absolutely takes the stress off of those long rides and occasional traffic jams. So the M8 is known to have a heavy clutch lever pull, which over time can really have an effect in the way you ride. The Rekluse Slave Cylinder clutch is a direct bolt-on replacement that reduces the lever pull without sacrificing lift. The lighter lever pull helps relieve the pain or loss of feeling in your clutch hand, leaving you with a better experience on the road. So what does your slave cylinder clutch do? So the clutch lever controls the fluid that goes to your slave cylinder. When you pull the lever in, the fluid inside the clutch cylinder and line hydraulically pushes the piston inside the slave cylinder, which then lifts the pressure plate. So hydraulic clutches rely on slave cylinders for clutch actuation. On a side note, according to the service manual for my model, you do have to do a clutch fluid change every 2 years. It has been past 2 years, so I'll do a moisture test just to see where I'm sitting at. Now with all that said, I've never ridden with one of these on anything else other than dirt bikes, so I'm really looking forward to doing my own testing and feeling if this is going to be beneficial for those looking to upgrade or ease their daily commute. So yeah, let's get this unboxed and install on the bike. All right, so in the box, you get your Rekluse Slave Cylinder. They do include a bleeder tube. This just helps you get the air bubbles out, and then your instructions. Now for tools, I use a foot-pound torque wrench, inch-pound torque wrench, a ratchet. Now you can use a 7/16 or an 11mm wrench, 5/16 wrench, Phillips head screwdriver. I did use the Motion Pro adjustable torque wrench adapter, 3/16 hex bit, 5/16 socket, and a 4-inch extension. So I use the MityVac Bleed Kit. Now you really don't need this if you're not doing a clutch or brake service, but I highly recommend it if you are keeping up with your regular service intervals. Just makes the job go a lot faster and a lot smoother. Now for this install, you do want your bike on a level surface. It doesn't matter if you're on a lift or just a jiffy stand, you just want your clutch master cylinder or reservoir to be level. Now you can always loosen up your clamp screws and rotate it to where it's level. Now before you start taking off the cap to the clutch reservoir, you want to remove your exhaust and transmission outer side cover first so you're not accidentally spilling any fluid. So I already have everything off the bike because I'm currently in the middle of another install. Now your setup might be different, but if you want to know exactly how I take everything off, you can check out some of my other videos where I cover everything I have on here. Now you can take the route of just loosening your exhaust, but then you run the risk of breaking or damaging your exhaust mounting studs with all that weight just hanging there. So to remove the outer transmission side cover, you have 2 screws, and I'm using a 3/16 hex bit. Now you want to note where this rubber grommet is positioned because you want to install it the same way. So here you have your OE slave cylinder. I'll break loose the clutch fluid line right here at the clutch line flare fitting. So here I'll just take a dry erase marker and note the position. Now to break this loose, you can use an 11mm wrench or a 7/16 wrench. You will have some fluid that comes out, so make sure you have a catch pan, and if you are leaving your exhaust on, just make sure you have that covered up so you're not ruining the paint. Now I'll remove the 3 screws for the slave cylinder, and it's a 3/16 hex bit. Now you do want to note where these screws go. You want to install them in the exact same spot. Now if you get any of this .4 fluid on any of your parts, just quickly clean it off with some clean water. So now I'll go ahead and completely remove it. Now just take my line and face it up so it's not spilling any fluid. Now before you install your new slave cylinder, you want to clean out the area. Now I'll take the Rekluse slave cylinder and I'll attach it to the hydraulic line, finger tight. You just want to make sure you lubricate the seal before you put it on. You can use some of the transmission fluid that came out. Now before you reinstall these screws, you want to get all this old thread locker off. Now I'll take the OE screws and thread them back into their same spots, and I'm also using blue Loctite. So the seal fitment on the Rekluse slave cylinder is tighter than the OE, so when you tighten these down, you want to tighten them down evenly. So there is a torque sequence on these screws. It's 1, 2, then 3. So the torque spec on these screws is 84 to 108 inch-pounds. I'll tighten them down to 95. So the grommets in the same position. I'll go ahead and tighten this down. So here I'm using the Motion Pro adjustable torque wrench adapter so I can torque down the hydraulic line. So the clutch fluid line is calling for 11 to 15 foot-pounds. I'll tighten it down to 13. So here I have a brake fluid tester pen that I purchased off Amazon. It detects how much moisture you have in your brake fluid. It just has these 2 prongs. You dip it inside your fluid and it tests for moisture. So right out of the bottle, brake fluid will be at 0%, and then you have less than 1%, 2%, 3%, and then 4%. And when you do your testing, these are just all your levels. So between 1% and 2%, you're okay. Anything above that, like 3 and 4%, it's pretty much a dangerous situation and you probably want to get your brake fluid changed. So what I'll do is I'll run a test real quick. I'll fill this up with water and I'll fill this up with brake fluid just to test this to make sure it works. Now it's always important to check your brake fluid and keep up with those regular service intervals, because when moisture is introduced into the brake fluid, it can actually begin to boil due to the tremendous amount of heat generated by the brakes. And in extreme cases, you can actually lose the ability to stop. Now for the clutch side of things, the clutch lever can start to feel spongy and begin to squeak. Now when it's time to change a brake fluid, you always want to use an unopened bottle, because once you open one of these, it's pretty much a one-time use because moisture does get inside of here. So this is the first time I ever bought one of these pens. I just keep up with my regular service intervals, so I never felt the need to buy one of these, but I wanted to buy it just to test it to see if it actually works. I still plan on changing my clutch fluid anyway, but I wanted to see if this was actually worth buying. So this tester just takes a AAA battery. So you have these 2 prongs, you just dip it in there. So I'll turn it on. The green light means that it's on. So I'll go ahead and test this. I'll turn it so I can see it. Looks like it's green. Obviously it's clean brake fluid right out of the bottle. So now we're just short of 10 milliliters, 9.9 maybe. I'll add about 0.01 milliliters of water. I'll stir it up. Getting about 1%, so that's pretty accurate there. I'll add another 0.001. Looks like we're at 3%. So we skipped 2% and went straight to 3%. So I might have added too much water, but You guys get the gist. It's kind of accurate, it's okay. Either way, if you're thinking about changing your brake fluid, just do it anyway. Pretty simple process. I'm changing out the clutch fluid anyway on this one, but we'll go ahead and finish this install. I'll run the test on the actual clutch fluid and see what it comes up at. So here I have the MityVac Bleed Kit. Great tool to have. I highly recommend it to anyone about to do a clutch or brake service. Just makes the job go a lot smoother. Has everything you need as far as adapters, hoses, fluid reservoir, and your vacuum pump. I'll show you exactly what's in this kit, but if all you're doing is just switching out your slave cylinder and you don't need to do a clutch service, you can just follow the instructions that Rekluse provides and you should be good to go. So for doing a clutch or brake service, this is all I'll be using. This kit does come with different adapters for automobile applications. So here you have your MityVac pump, you have your nozzle for your bleed screw. You could also just use the hose. This is just an adapter for the bleed screw nozzle and your hose. You have a couple of hoses. This is a cap for your fluid reservoir, another cap for your hose adapters for your fluid reservoir, and it does come with different size hoses. Just in case your bleed screw is a little smaller, you can use one of these hoses. So putting this together is pretty simple. This cap right here is just to transport your fluid if you want to go dump it so you can reuse it again. Here you have your hose to hose fluid cap, goes on your fluid reservoir. You have a hose that connects down here. You put your cap on. Just make sure you have a tight seal on there and it clicks in. Then you have your different hoses. Pretty simple to follow. One goes one end and the other goes on the other. So if you look at your pump, it does say to pump. So you want to put this hose towards your pump, and all these hoses should be a snug fit because you don't want any air to escape. Here you have an adapter that goes in the end of the hose, so you can plug in your bleed screw nozzle. So to recap, you have your MityVac vacuum pump. Here you have your gauge. This is your release. You have your hose that goes to your fluid reservoir, and if you look at the cap, it says to pump, so just make sure that's going to the pump. You have your fluid reservoir, and then another hose that leads to your bleed screw for your valve here. You just pump. You'll know if you have a good seal if it holds steady on the gauge. I usually just pump to 15. You'll know you have a good seal if you stay at 15 PSI and it doesn't drop. But once you crack that bleed screw, it'll suck out that fluid. So pretty cool tool to have. I highly recommend it. So before you remove the cap to your clutch reservoir, you just want to make sure you're on a level surface. Now, if you can't get on a level surface, you can always just loosen up your clamp screws and rotate your reservoir until it's level. Also, you want to make sure you protect all your painted parts. Now, you can put some painter's tape around your clutch reservoir and your handlebars, but I like to see if I spill anything so I can clean it up right away. But everything else underneath is covered up. Now, if you want to know what dot fluid you have, it should say it right on your cap. Mine says .4, and also .4 brake fluid is the exact same thing for clutch fluid for Harley Davidson. So to remove this cap, you have 2 Phillips head screws. So these screws will not come completely out. They stay with the cap. I just make sure I have something to catch underneath if any fluid comes off. So just be careful when you lift up on your cap. Now the gasket did come with the cap, so I'll just set it down on here. And when I set this down, I just set it down with the bottom facing down. So here you have your gasket. You always want to clean that off before you put it back on. So here I'll just run a moisture test, 2%. So according to the tester, I was still good to go, but I'll still be doing a service. So using the MityVac, I'm just using it as a suction so I can suck this out. So now I'll fill it in with some new fluid. So be careful not to overfill so it doesn't overflow while you're doing everything else. So here I'm using a 5/16 wrench to loosen and tighten this bleeder screw. Now you just want to do this in small increments, and also make sure that your clutch reservoir does not go empty, because you don't want to let any air in through the clutch line and having to repeat the process over again to get air out. So just do this in small increments and keep checking your clutch reservoir so it doesn't go empty. So you can see it doesn't have a good seal on there, so you might have to put some pressure on it, or you can just switch adapters or just use the hose. So instead of using this bleeder adapter, I'll go ahead and use the hose that comes in the kit, because the Rekluse Slave Cylinder bleeder screw is a little different than the OEM. So like I said, just make sure you're checking your clutch reservoir so it's not going empty. So I just repeat this process about 3 times just to make sure I have all the old fluid out of there. And then I also make sure that I have no air in the line. So if you're not doing a clutch service and you're just bleeding the clutch line, I'll go ahead and run you through that process. So you'll take the supplied bleed tube and put that on the bleeder screw, and then just have this end going into a catch pan or a bottle. So once you have your bleed tube attached to your bleed screw, you can remove the clutch reservoir cap. Now mine's already removed since I did the service. And now I'll just pump the clutch lever 3 to 5 times. And when you're pumping your lever, you just want to be careful that you're not spilling any fluid. And then I'll hold it against the handlebar grip. And here I'm just using a clamp to hold the clutch lever in place, so I can go on the other side and use a wrench to open the slave cylinder bleed port. Now I'll open up the bleed port, and I'm using a 5/16 wrench. So if you're doing this by yourself, you just want to do this in small increments so your reservoir doesn't go empty. That way you're not just letting air back in through the clutch line. And I'll repeat this process about 3 to 5 times until there's no more air coming out of the bleed port and the clutch feels normal. Now that there's no more air coming out of the bleed port and the clutch feels normal, I'll make sure that the clutch master cylinder is 75% full, and then I'll go ahead and put on my cap. So now I'll just install the gasket, and if there is some leakage, I'm not too worried about it. Once I get the cap on, I'll clean this all off with some clean water. So you want to tighten these down evenly. Now these 2 screws do have a torque spec, but you just want to get them down nice and snug. You don't want to over tighten and possibly strip the screw. If you do have some leakage, it is normal. The bike moves around a lot, no big deal. Just make sure you clean this out thoroughly with some clean water. So the torque spec on this bleed screw, it's calling for 150 inch-pounds. Now the transmission outer side cover, it's calling for 100 to 120 inch-pounds. Alright guys, so my thoughts on this Rekluse Slave Cylinder. I absolutely enjoy it. I've had it for about 2 weeks now since I've shot the video, and I absolutely love it. I've ridden in the city, just been stuck in traffic, being stuck at red lights or stop signs. It's absolutely a big help. Do I recommend it? Absolutely, for anyone who lives in the city, or pretty much anybody that just wants a reduced clutch effort on the your clutch hand. And just if you have a lot of pain or strain in your hands like I do, I have a lot of numbness in my hand just from shoulder issues that I've had just from the military.
So I absolutely recommend it for anybody who's looking for that reduced clutch effort. Other than that, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it helped. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and I'll see you on the next one.